A Russian Buyan-M warship worth tens of millions of dollars was targeted by Ukrainian special forces in an unprecedented daring operation. Under the pitch-black night in Temryuk Bay, which Moscow considered impregnable, Ukraine launched a reckless attack on the most dangerous floating fortress in the Sea of Azov. The target was the over 70-meter-long ship, equipped with the 3S-14 vertical launch system holding 8 Kalibr-NK missiles, each with a range of nearly 1,500 kilometers, enough to reach any city in Ukraine. On deck were the entire command staff and crew, who had just completed a Kalibr launch mission and were celebrating in the confidence that they were absolutely protected by Pantsir-S1 and Podlet-K1 radar. Worse, Temryuk port was dubbed the steel nest of multi-layered air defense, where Russia believed no UAV or missile could penetrate. For years, the Buyan-M had been a nightmare sowing terror in Ukrainian cities with surprise missile barrages. But that nightmare was attacked by Ukraine right in its safest place. How did two small FPV UAVs breach a defense grid worth hundreds of millions of dollars? And how did a strike lasting less than 7 minutes shake the entire Russian fleet? Don't take your eyes off the screen before the secret is revealed. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your opinion on this battle. 03 a.m. The surface of Temryuk Bay was pitch black, with only a few dim yellow lights flickering from the deck of the Buyan-M class missile ship anchored at Pier Number 2. This compact but deadly vessel had just completed a series of Kalibr-NK launches toward targets deep in Ukrainian territory and was entering the reloading phase. Fuel was being pumped into the technical compartment, the engine cooling system was rumbling, and new Kalibr missiles were being transported to the deck to be loaded into the 3S-14 UKSK vertical launch cluster. Each missile was over 6 meters long, weighed nearly 2 tons, carried a high-explosive warhead, and had a range of over 950 miles, enough to turn any Ukrainian city into a target. On deck, a group of young officers and a few mid-level commanders gathered around a steel table, pouring full glasses of vodka and clinking them noisily as if they were at home. In the central command room, the radar watchmen wearily changed shifts, with some slumping into chairs in a half-asleep, half-awake posture. Arrogant confidence enveloped the ship. They believed Temryuk was a rear fortress where no Ukrainian UAV or missile could penetrate, because this port was surrounded by a dense layer of air defense, coastal Pantsir-S1 batteries with multi-purpose radar and 12 ready-to-fire interceptor missiles, 2 Podlet-K1 radar stations scanning continuously 360 curie, covering from medium to high range, plus auxiliary sentry posts connected to the Russian naval network. Every training manual affirmed any airborne target entering within 20 kilometers would be detected and shot down in seconds. That's why the crew believed they were sheltered in an impregnable steel cage. But offshore, less than 6 nautical miles from the port, a small composite-hulled dinghy was silently cutting through the waves approaching. On the surface, it looked exactly like a cheap fishing boat, salt-faded hull, tattered nets dangling from the canopy, a strong smell of fish oil. Every detail was meticulously camouflaged to fool any distant eyes. Yet in the cockpit, it wasn't fishermen, but 2 Special Forces soldiers from Ukraine's 73rd Naval Center. They wore shabby jackets and Russian-style mesh hats, but their eyes were steely and highly focused. Behind the storage compartment, under a gray tarpaulin, there were no fish or seafood, but 2 heavy configuration FPV kamikaze UAVs. Each was over a meter long, with a 1.7-meter wingspan, a composite body painted matte gray to reduce infrared signature. The nose was fitted with a 3.5 kg armor-piercing explosive charge, capable of tearing through ship deck steel and destroying electronics within tens of meters. They used inertial navigation combined with infrared cameras. No GPS needed, no jamming worries. When launched, they would fly at just 2 to 3 meters above the water, completely outside the effective scan angle of Podlet-K1 and below the timely reaction range of Pantsir-S1. Ukraine had prepared for this moment for weeks. Reconnaissance pinpointed the Buyan-M's mooring position, tracked the maintenance schedule, and especially waited for the exact moment when the entire Russian command gathered on deck for reports and celebrations. A strike at that time wouldn't just neutralize the ship's firepower, but also sever its command brain on the spot. The 2 Ukrainian soldiers on the dinghy knew the risks well. They had only one path to survival: absolute silence, approach the launch point, and wait for the predetermined time. In the darkness, the distant whir of rotating radar echoed like rhythmic hammer blows on an empty barrel. And on the Russian ship's deck, vodka glasses were still being raised, laughter still echoing across the night sea. None of them knew that just a few kilometers away, the enemy was silently unsheathing the blade of death. Ukraine wasn't impatient. They knew that in modern warfare, power doesn't lie in the quantity of ammunition, but in choosing the right moment to strike the vital point. And at that moment, that camouflaged little dinghy was the trap closing in, ready to deliver the fateful slash into the floating fortress that the Russians thought was impregnable. 03:25 a.m. As the Buyan-M remained sunk in its illusion of safety, the camouflaged Special Forces dinghy had silently closed to less than 5 kilometers. In the cramped cockpit, the two soldiers hunched down to the deck, hands fumbling to remove the camouflage tarpaulin covering the storage compartment. Under the dim red light, the two FPV UAV blocks appeared like steel daggers, 1.1-meter-long bodies, 1.7-meter wingspans, matte gray composite fuselages, noses fitted with 3.5 kg armor-piercing charges with shaped copper cores to concentrate the penetration stream. Each was equipped with high-resolution infrared cameras, inertial navigation systems, INS combined with optical sensors, completely independent of GPS, eliminating electronic jamming risks. The rear electric motors allowed cruise speeds of 140 to 350 km/h, but emitted almost no infrared signature. They were invisible daggers, cheap but optimized to stab straight into the heart of the Russian steel beast. The dinghy pilot checked the electronic compass again. The dinghy was still gliding through the radar blind zone, where Podlet-K1 couldn't scan close to the water surface due to sea clutter interference. This was the tactical gap Ukraine had exploited, a narrow corridor right along the sea surface, where any object under 3 meters was lost on radar screens. And the shore-based Pantsir-S1, optimized for medium-range targets, couldn't lock onto small objects skimming the waves at all. The attack plan was designed like a 3-move chess game. UAV number 1. Thunderbolt. Mission to take down the main MR352 positive ME1.2 radar on the ship's command tower. This was the all-seeing eye for target detection, providing fire control data for Kalibr-NK and controlling the entire ship's weapon systems. If destroyed, the ship would go blind and unable to command nearby Pantsir-S1. UAV number 2. Vengeance. Mission to slam straight into the 3S-14 UKSK vertical launch cluster in the middle of the deck. 8 Kalibrs were in maintenance phase, with some launch tube caps open. A direct hit wouldn't just destroy the launcher, but ignite the entire control system, stripping the Buyan-M of long-range strike capability. 2 attack vectors, 2 different targets, but timing had to be synchronized precisely within 6 seconds to leave the enemy no time to react. 03:27. The UAV handler pulled the first safety pin. The electric motor whined softly, rear propellers whirring. The UAV was placed on a crude launch rail at the dinghy's stern. A light shove and it shot forward, skimming the water like a gray arrow. Seconds later, the second one launched too, keeping about 200 meters behind, flying at a 25 km offset to port. From above, if anyone looked down, they were just 2 faint blurs blending with the sea. Altitude no more than 2-3 meters, nearly dissolving into the night waves. From this point, the dinghy's mission was complete. The 2 Special Forces soldiers crouched low, turning off all signal lights, drifting slowly with the current. They knew everything from here depended entirely on the 2 small UAV blocks racing through the darkness. On the screen at the UAV control center in Zaporizhzhia, the feed flickered but was clear. Infrared lights appeared as glowing hotspots against the black background. In the distance, the cylindrical glow was the MR352 radar tower, rotating steadily. A bit farther, neat rows of square hot blocks. That was the open Kalibr launch tube caps. The operator gripped the joystick tightly. The display showed distance to target for UAV number 1 was down to 500 meters. In his ears, only the pounding of his heartbeat. The whole team held their breath. One small mistake, one sudden jolt, and it would all dissolve into sea foam. But the UAV flew steadily, holding extreme low altitude, evading all Russian radar scan angles. In the Buyan-M command room, everything was normal. Control panel lights blinked, soldiers typed on keyboards, laughter drifted down from the upper deck. No one knew death had pierced the hundreds of millions-dollar defense layer, with just hundreds of meters left to deliver the fatal slash. 03:28, UAV number 2 entered its attack flight path. The infrared camera clearly showed the row of vertical launch tubes, with one cap slightly open, the Kalibr missile body glowing from residual heat. The navigation system made a slight trajectory adjustment for a 25-trode approach angle, ensuring the impact would penetrate straight into the launch chamber. On the dinghy, the 2 Special Forces soldiers exchanged silent glances. They knew in the next few dozen seconds, the entire Temryuk Bay would shake from 2 unprecedented explosions. In the silent night darkness, 2 UAVs costing less than $2,000 each were slicing through the waves, preparing to slam into a target worth tens of millions of dollars, carrying firepower enough to burn half of Ukraine. The double strike had been unleashed, the blade in the darkness unsheathed, waiting only for the impact moment to turn the floating fortress into a charred steel wreck. 03:31 and 12 seconds on the remote control team's infrared screen, the MR-352 radar tower image sharpened, its outline blazing bright from the rotating motor's heat. UAV number 1, Thunderbolt, hurtled straight at it like a silver arrow. Distance displayed, 950 meters, 800. The operator gripped the joystick tight, nudging left slightly to hold the head on aim. On the Buyan-M deck, the antenna still rotated steadily. Soldiers still lax. No alarm sirens, no anti-aircraft bursts fired. The Russian ship was completely blind to the blade ripping through the night. 03:31 and 25 seconds. Thunderbolt slammed straight into the radar tower base. The explosion created a blinding white flash, accompanied by a deafening crack echoing across the bay. The antenna column was torn from its mount, the body flung to starboard, metal shards embedding deep into the steel deck. The MR-352 system shut down instantly, control panels in the command room flashing red with errors. Fire and black smoke erupted from the electronics compartment, enveloping the officers. A radar officer was pierced through the chest by shrapnel and collapsed on the spot. In seconds, the entire Buyan-M sensor suite vanished, the ship becoming a blind steel hulk. The ship commander screamed orders to urgently activate the shore-based Pantsir-S1 for supplemental air defense coverage. But it was all too late. The blast had severed comm circuits, the command cabin choked with smoke, soldiers dazed and unable to operate. Fire alarms blared deafeningly, temperatures in the compartment skyrocketed. This was the moment Ukraine had waited for, a golden 6-second window when the Russian defenses fell into chaos. 03:31 and 31 seconds. From port side, UAV number 2, Vengeance, raced in, speed 145 kilometers h, altitude just 2.5 meters. The infrared camera clearly displayed the 3S-14 vertical launch tubes, with tube number 3 cap open, the Kalibr missile body glowing from incomplete cooling heat. The operator tilted the joystick slightly, guiding the UAV into a 25 toward approach angle. Distance down to 400 meters, 250, 120. In the Buyan-M auxiliary compartment, an officer yelled, "Unknown object approaching port side." But smoke from the radar blast still obscured the optical camera lenses. The Pantsir fire order never went out. The 30mm gun barrels remained silent in the darkness. 03:32, exactly no known seconds, Vengeance plunged straight into tube number 3. The impact turned the mid-deck into hell. The launch tube cap was hurled skyward, flying dozens of meters away. Flames shot up like a torch column, black smoke billowing. The 3S-14 launcher's electronic controls ignited, wiring melting, cooling system destroyed. Adjacent tubes glowed red hot, chain explosion risk hanging in the air. The CO2 firefighting system auto-activated, spraying white gas across the deck, but the flames had burrowed deep into the technical compartment, incinerating the launch control module. The shockwave rippled through the entire ship. The Buyan-M listed 3 to 5 degrees to starboard, seawater flooding through cracks in the lower compartments. Emergency salvage pumps kicked in at full power, sailors rushing to close fire valves and haul hoses. But every effort only exposed the desperation more. The entire Kalibr system was dead, radar offline, comms flickering. A steel hulk that had once sown terror in Ukrainian cities was now a useless floating target. In the command room, thick smoke choked the air, red lights flashing wildly. The captain coughed raggedly, his hoarse voice over the UHF radio, "Radar down, Kalibr down, request immediate tow to base." The distress message went out amid static crackles and popping fire sounds. Soldiers panicked, some ditching personal weapons to grab life jackets. The officers who had just raised vodka glasses in celebration now trembled in the smoke and flames. No faith left in Temryuk's steel nest. It all unfolded in less than 7 minutes. From the first UAV leaving the dinghy to the Buyan-M losing all combat capability, the time was just enough to drain 1 vodka glass on deck. A hundreds of millions dollar air defense system neutralized by 2 UAVs costing less than $2,000 each. This was no longer a story about costs, but a warning. In modern warfare, smarts and patience can turn cheap weapons into death blows. In Zaporizhzhia, in the underground bunker, the UAV control team watched the smoke and fire-blurred screen. No cheers, no applause, just heavy silence. They knew the mission was complete. The Buyan-M, symbol of Russian long-range power in the Sea of Azov, had been knocked out of the fight. Death had come from 2 directions, precise and clean, leaving on the sea only a dying floating fortress, crying for help in vain. Less than 10 minutes after the double strike landed, The Buyan-M, the pride of the Russian fleet in the Sea of Azov, was now just a scorched, listing steel hulk in Temryuk Bay. Flames still raged in the mid-deck, a thick black smoke column twisting hundreds of meters high. Explosion lights still splattered on the water like blood streaks. The auto firefighting system had exhausted its CO2 tanks, sailors using handheld hoses to spray fire pockets, but in vain. The steel deck warped, welds cracked, many hatch covers twisted and unable to seal. The technical compartment at the ship's bottom was flooded, auxiliary pumps screaming but unable to maintain balance. The ship listed 5 degrees to starboard, a clear sign it had lost stability. In the command room, smoke-choked air made every order lost in coughing fits. Electronic panels were soot black, screens dead. Radio comms flickered, sentences breaking up. The captain still yelled into the mic, requesting shore-based tug rescue forces, but signals kept jamming amid crackling burnt circuit breakers. Surviving officers focused on aiding wounded comrades, 3 badly injured by shrapnel, 1 radar officer dead at his post. Soldiers lost control, some panicking down corridors screaming for life jackets, others trying to patch hull cracks with improvised steel plates. It was all meaningless. The Buyan-M was no longer a warship. It had become a floating target, waiting for tow back to port. The attack didn't just destroy hardware. It shattered the myth of Temryuk's absolute safety. This port had been seen as a steel fortress, with sentry radars, pre-positioned Pantsir-S1, multi-layered defenses. Russia once believed every Ukrainian UAV would be shot down before 10 kilometers. But in just 7 minutes, 2 small UAVs costing less than $2,000 each had pierced the entire defense layer, hitting 2 vital points, radar and missile launcher. The fallout went far beyond material value. The Buyan-M, the ship that had sown fear with long-range Kalibr strikes, was now a charred wreck. 0342, the Buyan-M's distress signal was finally clearly received by coastal forces. Radar down, Kalibr lost. Request tow to Sevastopol, but the tow distance was over 200 kilometers, and with each passing minute, chain explosion risk grew. In the Sea of Azov, sister ships were immediately ordered to retreat deep into other ports, halting all loading firing ops, putting deck guns on high alert. A cheap dagger had forced the entire fleet to shift its posture. For Ukraine, this wasn't just a tactical win. It was a message. No safe zones for Russian warships. Those tens of millions dollar floating fortresses now had to live with the specter of UAVs. Every time they opened Kalibr launcher caps or docked for reload, they could become targets. That meant Russian missile barrages on Ukrainian cities would be disrupted, their long-range campaign forced to scale back. On the Buyan-backed Russian sailors staggered through smoke and flames, rigging tow lines waiting for rescue ships. But they knew well, from this minute on, faith in Temryuk had collapsed. The floating fortress had fallen, not to million-dollar bombs, but to 2 small UAVs, silently skimming the waves, waiting for the right moment to plunge into the vitals. And from this night on, any Russian sailor stepping onto a Buyan-M deck or similar warship would carry an obsession. Nowhere was truly safe, and death could strike from any dark corner of the sea. When the clock in Temryuk Bay ticked past 040, the Buyan-backs had become a listing wreck, smoke still billowing from the mid-deck. But the battle's true meaning wasn't in the charred steel plates or flooded compartments. It lay in the lesson etched in blood and fire, one the Russian Navy and the world had to face. First, this was clear proof of asymmetric warfare's power. 2 FPV UAVs costing less than $2,000 each, operated by a small naval special forces team, had completely neutralized a tens of millions dollar warship protected by multi-layered air defenses. Instead of wasting volleys of expensive cruise missiles, Ukraine exploited the radar blind zone right along the sea surface, chose the perfect moment, and launched a precise double strike on radar and launcher. Result: a floating fortress turned to scrap in under 7 minutes. Second, the concept of safe rear areas had collapsed. Temryuk had been seen as an impregnable base where Buyan-Ms and other warships could reload, repair, prepare for Kalibr barrages. But after this battle, every Russian port in the Sea of Azov became a potential target. No steel zone could stop small daggers flying close to the waves. Every time a Russian warship lifted a launcher cap or tied up at a pier, it had to live in fear of kamikaze UAVs incoming. Third, the battle affirmed modern tactical thinking. Patiently wait for the right moment, strike the vitals instead of direct confrontation. Ukraine didn't rush. They waited until Russian commanders clustered on deck, when systems were most lax and vulnerable. That patience turned 2 small UAVs into a strategic punishment. From now on, any Russian sailor stepping onto a Buyan-M deck or similar warships would carry an obsession. Nowhere was truly safe, and death could strike from any dark corner of the sea. That was the lesson of steel and fire. One experience enough to shift the entire battlefield dynamic. If you find the story of how Ukraine turned two small UAVs into a nightmare for a Russian floating fortress compelling, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next battlefield analyses. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video with even more dramatic and intense battles.